Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's great to have you join us today for our webinar, Implementing Elementary Social Studies Across a District. I'm your host, Martin Andrews, Creative Director at Inquire Ed, and today's webinar is part of our fall series presented by the National Council for the Social Studies and Inquire Ed. And our final session will be in December, A Day in the Life, Inquiry in a fifth grade social studies classroom. You'll get to see inquiry in action, how a lesson unfolds from start to finish, and how students build and apply knowledge in meaningful ways. We hope you will join us. It is going to be great. As I mentioned, this series is brought to you by the National Council for the Social Studies and Inquire Ed. NCSS has been leading the way in advancing social studies education and supporting educators for nearly a century, and we are so grateful for their partnership and helping bring all of these conversations to the field. If you're planning ahead, the NCSS conference is coming up December through the 7th in Washington, D.C. It's always an inspiring event. We will see you there. Inquire Ed will be there at booth 305. The series is also presented by Inquire Ed. Inquire Ed supports teachers with high-quality instructional materials that make rigorous, joyful, and transferable learning possible for every student. Our elementary social studies curriculum, Inquiry Journeys, is used across the country to help students build deep content knowledge and develop those inquiry skills that are essential for a thriving democracy. You can find out more at inquireed.com. Reach out. We'd love to chat about social studies and inquiry-based learning. So last time we talked about high-quality instructional materials in social studies. And we know that high-quality instructional materials can really change the equation for teachers across the country, but it is not helpful at all if you have high-quality instructional materials and they don't get used. So today we are going to talk a little bit about how you can actually put those high-quality instructional materials into practice, specifically looking at elementary social studies. We're going to talk to 4 different panelists, but first I would like to invite Rachel and Sarah on. Hey guys, how are you?
Hi, Martin. Hey.
Good to see you. So I want to start this off with you, Sarah, and ask you the question. We know that high quality instructional materials are only one piece of the puzzle, but it's not a magic bullet. And when you implement high quality instructional materials, it actually is asking teachers to do a lot. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we're talking about high quality instructional materials in social studies. And that is asking for a pretty profound change in a lot of school systems. In many school systems, social studies has not been taught or has been barely taught, or sometimes it is a slice of social studies. Maybe it's one of the disciplines of social studies, but not the whole subject area. And we're talking about inquiry. We're talking about, for many folks, making a shift to inquiry-based instruction. And so those are 2 really profound shifts. And we see all the time there being 2 solutions to asking teachers to make this shift. One is we can provide them with high quality instructional materials. Here you go, get started, let's see how it goes. The other is providing really great professional learning, maybe a day of inspirational PD around what is inquiry-based social studies. And we see over and over again that these 2 solutions alone don't work. We know this as educators. We've all attended great inspirational days of PD and then go back to our normal setting, and it doesn't change our daily practice. It doesn't get put into practice. We also know, and I think Rachel and I see this a lot in our roles supporting districts, that if we do not provide teachers with ongoing supports with high quality instructional materials, that can lead to picking and choosing from those materials in a way that is not the design of the material, or it can lead to frustration and oftentimes abandonment. And so that's where we get that piece, Martin, where you're like, you can provide the materials, but if they're not being used, then we're not going to see the impact for students. So it is not PD or the HQIM. It's the two together. It's
Mm.
curriculum-based professional learning. And so I want to talk a little bit about what is curriculum-based professional learning and why I believe in it so much. I have this paragraph. This is from Jim Short and Stephanie Hirsch. They wrote The Elements, in which they really dig into what is curriculum-based professional learning, what does it look like, and why is it powerful? And I love this paragraph. And I am going to read it to you. Curriculum-based professional learning invites teachers to participate in the same sort of rich, inquiry-based learning that new academic standards require. Such learning places the focus squarely on the curriculum, and I interpret that as the tools and materials teachers are using. It is rooted in ongoing active experiences that prompt teachers to change their instructional practices, expand their content knowledge, and challenge their beliefs. So when we are asking teachers to make this change, we are asking them to change practice, change what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and begin to expand and challenge what they believe in terms of quality instruction and quality social studies. And so I'm going to share a little story, and I'm going to do this quickly about why I am such a believer in curriculum-based professional learning. And to do this, I'm going to tell you the story of a time where I really shifted my thinking and I changed my daily practice. And before I share my story, I want to challenge all of you, Rachel, Martin, anyone who's listening. I want you to think of a time where you really shifted your thinking and changed your practice, changed what you do on a day-to-day basis. And it's okay. You can think about it in a work setting, an education setting, but you can also think about it in like how I parent my children or how I played a sport, anything, just a time where you really shifted your thinking and changed what you did on a daily basis. And for me, the reason why I'm a believer, Martin, you can take me to my next slide, is Blue Apron. And I don't know if you know what Blue Apron is. I bet a lot of listeners out there know what it is, but it's a meal kit. You get a box delivered to your doorstep, and it has the recipes and the ingredients for 3 meals a week. And I had just had my first child, and somebody gave my husband and I a box of Blue Apron. And I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. Why did they give this to me? I don't cook. I don't cook. I can't cook. Why did they give this to me? And I had it, so I didn't want to waste it. So I opened it up and I cooked the first meal, and I followed the step-by-step instructions, and I used all the ingredients that were there for that meal. And all I needed to do was show up with a knife and a cutting board and a pan, and I cooked a good meal. And so I was like, all right, I'll do the next one. And I wasn't perfect. I burned a few things. It wasn't the most amazing cooking ever, but I made it through the box. And my husband and I thought, maybe we'll subscribe. We'll keep going. And so week over week, we cooked 3 meals a week, and we just used the ingredients and we followed the step-by-step instructions, and we got a little faster and we got a little more comfortable, and we started to feel good about it. And then one day we didn't have a box, and we had already put the kids to sleep, so we couldn't go out to dinner. And I opened up the fridge and I was like, we have some ingredients. Why don't we just cook something? And my husband said to me, what will you do first? And I said to him, I think I'm going to saute the aromatics. And so the story here is, how did I go from saying, I don't cook, I can't cook, to I'm going to saute the aromatics? It was this idea of ongoing practice-based learning. Curriculum-based professional learning is the same as Blue Apron in the sense that it was rich inquiry-based learning. I was learning by doing. I had my hands on every step of the way. It focused the learning squarely on the tools and materials. I was dicing things. I was chopping things. I knew when to turn the stove up to high and when to turn it back down to medium because I was doing it and I was using the materials. It was ongoing and active. I will tell you, before this, I had gone to cooking classes and I left thinking, wouldn't it be nice if I could cook? No, this wasn't one and done. It was ongoing. And then finally, and most importantly, it changed my practices on a day-to-day basis. And it expanded my content knowledge. I knew what to do with the tops of the green onions versus the bottoms of the green onions. I learned along the way, And it challenged my beliefs. Rachel was with me last night, and another colleague asked this, not knowing I was going to talk about this today, asked me, "Do you cook?" And my answer was, "Yes, I cook." And so it changed me from believing I can't cook, I've never been able to cook, to yes, I cook. And so that is what curriculum based professional learning can do. We have to give teachers the materials to get started. We have to tell them it's okay. You don't need to be an expert the first time or the first few times. We have to acknowledge it is going to take longer when you get started, and you are going to get faster as you go along. And over time, teachers are going to believe that not only can they instruct this way, but their students learn really well this way, and that they're going to want to do it. And it's really important, and Rachel is going to talk about this more, that as they go through this, as they go through this experience, we are unpacking it with them. We are supporting them with it. We are going deeper. Maybe they're giving an assessment as part of the curriculum because it's there, it's part of the tools and materials, but over time we're unpacking, what does assessment look like in inquiry-based social studies? So that's part of the wraparound supports teachers need. So we at Inquire Ed use this definition of curriculum-based professional learning. It's high quality professional learning that is built in. So it's right there in your lesson plan many times. It's that whisper in the ear that maybe a teaching note gives you. And it's also around the curriculum that teachers use every day. It supports educators as they implement high quality instructional materials through active ongoing learning connected directly to their classroom practice. So it is no longer theoretical. It is no longer one and done, but it is about what they're going to do tomorrow in the classroom.
There's a whole lot of research that I will share in the blog post that talks about why this is effective, but sometimes it's a personal story like that makes things click. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And I think everyone who's listening, if they really think about something that changed them, they would have those 4 qualities too, that it was
Yeah.
ongoing, active, focused on the tools and the materials.
Hey, Rachel, so you have your high quality instructional materials, and maybe you have this model for aligned professional learning, but there seems to be a lot more that has to go into actually getting folks to implement the instructional materials and the professional learning. And a large part of it is that they're kind of missing the infrastructure for that. The instructional leaders are maybe the ones who can make sure that there is time provided for professional learning. So you actually spend a lot of your time working with instructional leaders. And I want you to talk us through how you help them build the infrastructure for something like curriculum-based professional learning and implementing high quality instructional materials.
Yeah. So I think one of the ways I often describe it is everybody might be using the same resource from us, Inquiry Journeys, but the way that it shows up in a district is going to look a little different district to district because their infrastructure looks different. Their instructional time might be different. The amount of time they have for professional learning is going to be different. Really helping to do some strategic thinking with district leaders. It's really thinking about what move should I use when and why, and really helping to be strategic about that. So we use some frameworks to help unpack this really early on. These conditions that you see here, they're adapted from instruction partners, and they were conditions for effective professional learning. But I remember when we saw these the first time, I was like, these are actually conditions that we need to be thinking about for any initiative, curriculum implementation included. So really thinking about, do we have the vision? Are we communicating the vision? And are other people aware of the vision? Do we have the time? If we don't have the time, what time do we have? And how do we work within those parameters? You can't focus on all of the things all of the time. So I think this is a really helpful way to just see, like, where are we going, and how do we close some of those gaps? I think one of the things that I hear most often, and I bet this probably resonates with a lot of people who are social studies people in this space, is there's not enough time. Whether that's professional learning time, instructional time is the number one thing we hear from partners. That is a real challenge. So there's a lot of things that we think about with that. I think one of the things I'll hear is, I'm not responsible for school schedules. That really is something that building leaders have to be the ones who manage. So that's really out of my control. And that's where we have to really think about, it might be out of your most narrow circle of control here, but can you influence it? Can you have a conversation with a school leader and help provide maybe some sample pacing guides or master schedules, things like that? So it's not totally outside of your control. Can you influence some of those things like instructional time? So I think that's something where thinking back to those conditions and thinking about which ones are inside of your control, which ones are outside of your control, and how do we just shift the needle within these two frameworks, really all with the purpose of moving along what we call an implementation journey. And one thing I just want to note about a word on this slide that I think often causes a lot of reactions from people is this word fidelity. And the way we interpret the word fidelity, if you've got a high quality resource that is got that embedded professional learning, it has those embedded differentiation supports, it's not about following the script. It's about understanding how the curriculum was designed so that you can maximize the impact on student outcomes. And actually doing exactly what is there without thinking about your students is not really fidelity, because we want people to be thinking about their students and how they're going to be able to move along that journey. And we're also not going to get there overnight. We can't expect teachers to jump straight to stage 4 without, I think this really connects back to Sarah's Blue Apron story of you have to actually start doing the thing to develop the knowledge and skills. You have to persevere through some of those challenges where you burned some things while you were cooking the thing, and then you went back and you tried it again and you saw the impact. You can't jump straight to fidelity. You have to go through those experiences. So I think really being strategic about how all three of these things are working in tandem, the conditions, what's in your influence, where do I want to devote my energy, when and why, is the work that we really do with instructional leaders so that we can really start to move the needle for social studies.
Sarah, you want to bring on other panelists? And then I will actually just hop in the chat and I'll keep track of questions.
Hi. Okay. So we'd love to welcome on Carolyn Worcester and Sarah Whelan from Alexandria City. And if you both can take a moment just to introduce yourselves and your roles that you play in Alexandria City.
Thank you. My name's Sarah Whelan. I'm the K-12 specialist for social studies in Alexandria. Alexandria is a district right outside of Washington, D.C. We have about 16,500 students. Very diverse district, about 40% multilingual learners, over 100 languages spoken in the division. Just a wonderfully rich and diverse place.
I am Carolyn Worcester. I get to work with Sarah. I am the elementary literacy instructional specialist in Alexandria City.
Fantastic. And Sarah and Carolyn, you work really closely with Rachel as you all are exploring inquiry journeys as a social studies curriculum to be your solution for social studies. And we really just want to talk to you today about really the journey you've been on and the journey you've asked teachers to go on as you implement inquiry journeys in your classrooms. So Rachel, you want to kick us off with some questions?
Sure. I'll start by saying one of the best parts of my job is that I get to hear all of the great ideas from people like Carolyn and Sarah and steal them and then go share them with everybody else. So it's really exciting for them to be here so that you can hear them directly from the source. I want to start by just asking, so the last webinar that we had was really focused on high quality instructional materials. So I'd love to just start with what were some of your priorities as you started looking for high quality instructional materials for social studies?
Sure. And I do want to front load everything we say with letting everybody know that we're in the middle of this journey. We certainly don't have all the answers, but we're really excited about the work and feel like it's the right work. So happy to share what we can today. So in terms of our priorities for high quality instructional materials, we really have been on a pretty long journey in ACPS trying to work towards more authentic and project-based learning experiences for our students. And social studies really feels like the natural place to do that for students. It's interesting, it connects to what students care about, and it connects to the cultural diversity and the complexity of our community. So we've always wanted social studies to be this rich thing that goes beyond rote memorization and worksheets. And at the same time, we also know that social studies has received the least attention probably in our elementary schools and the least amount of instructional time of the core areas. So if we want social studies to be this rich and authentic experience for our students, we feel like we need instructional materials that really help and support teachers in doing that. We feel like it's not sufficient to give teachers a traditional textbook and hope that they'll figure out the inquiry piece and make it engaging for students. So it was really it is a priority for us to equip them with something that is really well thought out, with a scope and a sequence that brings students into the disciplines of history and geography and civics and economics, and that guides teachers through guiding students through explorations of those domains. We also wanted to consider materials that are literacy rich and build knowledge. We knew that was really important for our literacy priorities in the division. And we also just really want something that brings our standards to life. Here in Virginia, we have pretty detailed standards that are a lot of declarative knowledge with skills that are in there, but we wanted to make sure that we were focusing on that skill piece and looking for materials that would help us do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we have spent so much time thinking about, this shift that we've been talking about since the beginning of the webinar, is really thinking about is a daunting shift. And you've done a lot of thinking about how do you support teachers in that shift. Would love for both of you to just think about what are some things that you've been doing to support teachers in that shift. Sarah, I think I even heard you mention in one of our more recent meetings, like, I knew if I put the high quality instructional material in front of all teachers cold, it was not going to land well. So we've done a lot of just laying the foundation, and would love to hear you speak about some of those things.
And I think that shift for a lot of our teachers has been a shift from here are some standards, and we, in our curriculum, in our own division curriculum, would unpack those standards into what we felt were conceptual units with an understanding by design framework of essential questions and big ideas. And then we would say, here's some resources. Here's a textbook. Here's some primary sources you could use to enhance this. Here's an activity you can do to practice vocabulary. Here's an assessment. Maybe we have some performance assessments and some more traditional assessments. But it was a lot of choose your own adventure and mix and match, and not necessarily as coherent as we would like it to be. So I think providing this resource that helps them see the value in following a sequence and thinking of things from a unit level and not just a topic to topic level. So really, it's time to sit down and unpack that and make those connections. And that's still a challenge. We still are facing that challenge because depending on where teachers are and the priorities in their school, they may or may not have time for that. I think you've provided us some great tools that help support teachers with that unpacking. And I think our teachers' experiences with HQIM and other content areas has perhaps helped them get their experience with doing that. Carolyn, I don't know what else you'd like to add.
Yeah, I think Sarah says it all. I'm along for the literacy ride, which I'm sure we'll get to those questions next. But I think for me, it's the type of instruction I want for my own children, right? We want for our children, combined with the type of support we want for our teachers and we would want ourselves as a teacher, right? And it's often hard to find those two things in one package where I'm really doing this rich, deep type of work in classrooms, but I have the tools I need to do it. So that for us and how to balance those two things in our work with teachers as well, to create and model, as you said earlier, the type of learning experience we want them to nurture for their children.
Another thing I'm thinking about here is that if we are asking, I think you guys are describing shifting from like a homegrown solution where like you had thematic units and you had some resources, but not all of the guidance. And when we're asking teachers to take that and put it into practice in their classroom, we are asking them to use a lot of their capacity as curriculum designers. And we know that once a curriculum is designed, there's still work to be done to make it fit our students, to know the unique individuals in our classrooms and meet them with the experience. And there's only so much any individual teacher can give to the social studies. And so we're using it up in designing curriculum when we could be thinking about how am I going to differentiate this for my students? How am I going to pull on their lived experiences? And so really shifting what we're asking teachers to do and giving them the time to do that.
I think the other thing that I see a lot too is a lot of standards are written in a way that maybe you have your content standards and your skill standards. So when you have what Sarah is talking about as that, the guiding questions with the resources, you're also leaving it to teachers to really think about, I've got my content resources, but how am I really approaching those skills? And when you're in elementary, you don't have time to think about and try to conceptualize what are my strategies to do that? How do I approach inquiry through all of those things? So it's really challenging to do. I'm curious, Carolyn and Sarah, I think one of the things that you all have done a really great job of laying the foundation is this partnership right here. And the fact that, Sarah, you were working with Carolyn and thinking about how do we collaborate? Why should we collaborate? Would love to just hear a little bit about why you felt like that was important. And then, Carolyn, why you felt like what brought you into this? Why would you even want to collaborate? Because you've got your own stuff going on too.
Yes. So we like to tell the story of we were in a meeting where basically the elementary specialists were told, figure out the school day, figure out how many minutes we can spend on each content area. And it was tough because our day is short and it's tricky. But aside from that, Carolyn and I just both really believe in thinking about educating the whole child. And it just makes sense that what is good for a student is to get to explore what they are curious about and that is connected to their own identity and their community and their family. In knowing that was the type of social studies that we want, it just made a lot of sense to fit that in with literacy too, and those foundational skills. So I think there are lots of things about the partnership that make it work, but it comes down to our beliefs, I think, about our shared beliefs about what is good for kids. Carolyn has just been very generous in helping think through how we can do some of this lift to make it approachable for a teacher to consider how literacy and social studies are really working together and making each other stronger.
And generous, but also selfish, because this is certainly helping to support our literacy goals as well. I think all of us with the science of reading are coming to a different understanding about how we build knowledge and how building knowledge is really helping to build reading. And who is really good at building knowledge? Our social studies friends, right? There is such depth in consideration of how these units are designed and how that is helping to build lasting knowledge, which we know is critical for reading comprehension. So I think all of Sarah's work coinciding with our shifts to the science of reading really made us realize the importance. And then too, we all in the literacy world, right? We want to read and write for authentic purposes. Reading becomes so much more engaging when I'm doing it for real reasons about texts that actually matter, and when I'm writing and creating my own messages for an authentic purpose. The work has certainly supercharged our literacy experiences as well, and I'm so lucky to have Sarah, who's been willing to innovate and try to figure it out together.
And I want to give credit to our teachers too, because I think our teachers see the connections. I think they are like, come on, but it makes sense for us to be reading and writing about the topics that we're learning about in social studies and science, and they were looking for those connections. And I think what this more deliberate partnership has allowed us to do is to go a little bit deeper with that, and not just we're reading and writing about a topic, but how are we exploring it over the course of a unit in a way that's really deepening social studies content knowledge and literacy skills.
I would agree. Those of us who work in departmentalized places, Sarah and I in our roles, often forget that in elementary schools, it's usually one human being doing all the things, right?
Yeah.
So to them, it makes perfect sense to make these connections in ways that we have to think a little bit more intentionally about.
Yeah, I think one of the other powers, I joke about being told that figure it out, but for those people who aren't told to figure it out, there's still a strategy in there of if that collaboration is important, how do I build this buy-in with my ELA counterpart or my other department counterparts? Because if we're all making separate recommendations for instructional time that ends up being more than what the day allows, then that is leaving it up to the school. So really helping, I think collaboration is one of those strategies, particularly for that condition of time of thinking about how are we aligned as a department team and building that messaging and supporting the schools and carrying that messaging out. It's not just, I think that is that one that I see most often of out of my control or totally trying to control it. And it's actually that collaboration is just so critical.
And I think, oh, sorry.
No,
I was
go
gonna
ahead.
add, a piece of that has helped it work, or part of our motivation was that if we knew we were going to be, or if our division was going to be telling schools, you have to spend this much time on social studies, we were just really committed to the idea that we wanted them to have something good. We didn't want them to just be like filling time with social studies in a low level kind of way. So the instructional time is like a is a benefit and a challenge, I think, that we've been trying to navigate. But I think that was a big part of our push, was like, let's do something really good with that time, because we know it's not much time.
Yeah, I remember you saying, I think in one of our more recent meetings too, like that teachers had time before, but you didn't, social studies may or may not have been happening because of the lack of resources. And now we're early on in the journey and starting to hear from teachers what's going on. And they're actually using resources and they're experiencing some of that change in belief that Sarah was talking about, which I think actually leads me into my next question too, that I'd love to just hear that concept of shifting beliefs and changing practice and the order of operations there. Do you have any teachers who like that story resonates with, that maybe a teacher who was initially hesitant, maybe didn't have as much belief and had an aha moment after going through a unit or a process with students and seeing some of those impacts?
Yeah, Carolyn, this was last year. Carolyn and I met with a 5th grade team that was challenged. 5th grade is probably our tightest time, lots of testing at the end of 5th grade. And they were feeling that we were asked to come meet with this team. They were feeling a lot of stress and concern and challenged by trying to fit in social studies. And they were trying to see where the writing piece fit in with the social studies and the way that we were doing it. And I think probably had looked at the resource and felt like maybe it was too much. They hadn't really had time to dig into it yet, and felt like maybe their students weren't ready for it. Their students had too much on their plates too. So we were able to just sit down and walk through it a bit and explain how doing these inquiry journeys was actually going to replace some of the other writing that they had in their schedule. And I'm not sure exactly how we got to it, but they tried it. And one of those teachers came to a focus group that Rachel ran a couple months later after completing the unit, and just couldn't say enough about the great things that she had seen in her students in particular, how her students were having deeper conversations, how valuable it was for her multilingual learners to have this practice and these rich discussions. So yeah, just a light bulb of trying it. And to her credit, she tried it, even though she was a bit skeptical. She went out there and she made it work for her kiddos and came back with a lot of positives to share.
Just on this note of writing, we all got to hear Nell Duke recently speak, and she shared that there's a lot of research that kids are more willing to stick with a piece of writing, revise their writing, and do better, deeper writing when they're writing about something that matters to them. And so, Carolyn, this really, you already said it. We want topics and issues that are deeply meaningful to students, and social studies gives us that.
You're making me think, Sarah, too, about another district that we work with, Denver, who is telling a story about how a teacher in Denver did a PSA as their informed action product. And part of the PSA was scripting out what students were going to say on the commercial that they were creating. She was like, I've never seen my kids respond to revision like they did in that. And revision is one of those skills that's just so hard to get students bought in. Why do I want to do this? But because they cared about the thing they were doing, they were so much more bought into that. So I think that's informed action, and doing that as part of project-based learning and social studies is really a powerful opportunity. Are there anything, when you think about any of the conditions, I think one that we are still like figuring out and trying to test some things out and thinking about is particularly the role that school leaders play, and trying to just spread, like, you've got some of these aha stories where teachers are trying it, they're doing the thing, and you want to elevate them. Can you talk to any of the things that you're thinking about of like, how do we spread that? How do you build that momentum across a district, particularly the size of you all? Because you have a lot of things on your plate and a lot of schools, a lot of teachers. You can't be everywhere all at one time. So how are you thinking about building that across the district and that momentum?
I'll let Sarah speak to some of our solutions. I'm just going to elaborate on the challenge. Just like the infrastructure doesn't exist in other places for social studies, it's been challenging even within our coaching setup that we don't have some of the same supports for implementing this that we might for some of our literacy resources. Even getting our instructional coaching and such, there haven't been the same structures I've relied on before to move some of this work. And so Sarah and I are thinking about some ways to move beyond that, which I can let you talk about, Sarah.
Yeah, and I think we're trying to come from a very encouraging and positive place. Like, we're trying this, we're going to start, let's see what happens. This is not like a compliance. We're coming in to check to make sure you did every lesson and every module. So just trying to get people excited about the possibility of this for our students. As I think I mentioned, ACPS has recently, like a lot of districts, has a new profile of a learner that highlights these characteristics that we want students to cultivate, like critical thinker and communicator and collaborator, change maker. And those feel like a real opportunity because everybody believes in that. These are the things we want for our students. And it takes some planning and some work to have the experiences that students need to have in order to become those people. So I think we've really been able to look at inquiry journeys and say, these are things that are built in. These are rich explorations that include a lot of critical thinking and collaboration and taking action that go right along with that. So that's one point that we're trying to leverage of it can be a steep learning curve to design those things. So can this be an express lane to help our folks see what it looks like when students are learning in that way? So that's one piece, is just thinking about the framing. And we're also trying to look for who is ready to leap into the work a little more wholeheartedly. So we are trying a couple of things. One is a cohort of inquiry champion teachers. We think that when we have teachers out in front leading and saying, we're doing this cool thing, come see my classroom, we think that will help. So we're going to work with those teachers to be leaders in the division in terms of providing some professional learning and some modeling of how to plan using inquiry journeys. And then we are also working on selecting a couple of lighthouse schools, we're calling them. So schools who are ready, like I said, to jump in and lead the work, so that we're not asking everybody to do it in a way that feels difficult for schools that just can't right now. And we do have some of those. So these lighthouse schools, we're hoping to provide a little extra support for. We're asking Rachel to come in and model in classrooms a bit so people can see what it looks like, and just provide a little bit of extra planning support as they're getting ready to implement, and then also helping them plan how they're going to take action and how they're going to celebrate the work of students. So we hope those lighthouse schools will build some positive energy and help lead the work so that it's more voices from the schools recognizing the benefits.
I think something that is really exciting about that too is, like, there are so many different avenues that we have to take. You're not just leaning in on one thing. You named like 4 different things that are happening alongside of each other, all in an effort to make those. I think sometimes we make, what is it that Shanti always says, the make perfect the enemy of the good. And we want all the pieces in place before we go do the thing. I think that happens with teachers a lot too. Like, they want all the training, they want everything to be totally front loaded, but like curriculum-based, you got to make the change first, and then you're going to have those beliefs changed. So doing all of those pieces is starting to do that. I think another thing I just want to elevate that you just said too, that I think has been really powerful in other partners that we've worked with as well, is connecting to the things like profile of a learner, portrait of a graduate, as places where social studies is where you're really going to be able to build some of those skills. Because I think that it's an entry point, right? Because I think for a lot of people who you might be working with, whether it's school leaders or other district stakeholders, they maybe didn't grow up learning social studies in this way. So they don't see yet that connection, and trying to help draw that connection for them of why we would do this for social studies, how informed action provides those opportunities. I think you start to see the light, and people are like, oh, that's what social studies is now. And they're just a little bit more open to it, and they see it aligned to district goals. And I think there's only power in that, because then you've got your teachers who are like, oh, this isn't just one more thing. It's something that's helping me achieve expectations that have been set for me.
Carolyn, we have a question in the chat that I would love to pose to you. You talked about how your district's shift to understanding the science of reading and the importance of background knowledge was part of how you could make the connection to social studies and really justify this shift to inquiry-based learning and social studies. I would love to hear a little bit about where your teachers were in terms of just how did your district make the shift in terms of the science of reading piece, and what did literacy look like over the past several, maybe 5-10 years? And what kind of shifts needed to be made there? And how did you do it to draw this connection?
Yeah, that could be a long story. So I'll try to be brief. I think HQIM was incredibly important in our shift to the science of reading. Within the past 5 years or so, since I've joined Alexandria City, we have made major shifts in the materials we're using, which are aligned with the science. And I think the point about beliefs following that is really true, right? Helping to give people the tools and see the results then help to shift those beliefs. I think also the earlier point, and I even wrote it down, about understanding how the curriculum was designed to maximize the impact on student outcomes. You need to do that for your literacy curriculum too. So it's real, like for us, for example, we're using Sharon Walpole's research, Bookworms, through Open Up Resources. And our work with her team at the University of Delaware has given us a really deep understanding of the research behind the curricula we're using so that we can make professional decisions about where it fits with social studies and how to replicate those research-based routines when I'm reading or writing about social studies. So I think it's really important, whatever resource you might be using, to really understand the research behind it so that you can make these connections and these shifts when you're looking to integrate with social studies as well. So there's lots we could say about our shift to the science of reading practices, but I would, for this call, really emphasize the importance of HQIM and that journey as well.
Yeah. And the importance of this goes, I think this is the story of curriculum-based professional learning. You can have a curriculum and say, get started, get going. But that idea of unpacking how the curriculum is designed, why a lesson has a certain structure, what are the objectives in a lesson? Because no curriculum is going to be just plug and play. We know teachers have to make decisions all the time. And so giving them the tools to know, if I make this decision, what are the implications for my students?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
I think one of the other things too, Carolyn, that I'm hearing a little bit in what you're saying too is something I'm starting to hear a lot from people who are more in the social studies space is the feeling of my social studies is getting covered in my knowledge building ELA curriculum. That's what I'm being told. And that I think comes from not understanding what is being expected to be covered. So just really understanding like what is social studies, I think is important in connection to also understanding the research. Social studies is so much more than history. And I think a lot of times what is being covered as knowledge building curriculum might only be history, actually. And you're missing out on the inquiry components. You're missing out on all of those other content areas too.
Yeah, and I think Sarah and I have run into that a lot, where perhaps I'm reading a book about something that happened a long time ago, and now I think I've taught social studies. So how we build the skill sets for both is an ongoing journey for us, for sure.
And we've seen the downstream effect of that, like when students are getting to middle school and being asked to engage in more rigorous types of social studies, we're finding that they're not prepared as we would want them to be to do that. So it does really take looking closely at what we're doing to make sure that it is giving students that depth of knowledge and the skills to be able to do those things.
I know we only have about 5 minutes left, so I would love to just ask what has been most rewarding for you in starting to see this work come to life? I know you're feeling like maybe you're at the early part of your journey, but what has been most rewarding so far?
I can start. I have a story about a teacher that's on the other end of the spectrum from Sarah, which many of our school leaders will appreciate. I'm often brought in when things are hard, right? When things aren't going well, when all the things aren't happening. And visiting this fifth grade classroom a few weeks ago, where lots of things weren't working, but Inquiry Journeys was. Like, the kids were in groups talking about these natural resources. And the teacher had just found the tool. It was harder not to use the tool than to use the tool. And so while there's a great depth of things that can be improved and built upon, just having a level floor at which our teachers can really come in with all different skill sets, but provide some similar baseline instruction has been really helpful in our highest needs schools. So that's been exciting for me to see as we get this up and going.
For me, I think it's the partnership. One aspect is the partnership of this that's really been invigorating to be looking at things a little differently and in collaboration with somebody. And then what sticks with me of all the conversations, and not, there are challenges, but when we do hear positives, I feel like the most standout positive that I hear is how students are having rich conversations and how it's really good for our multilingual learners. So I think like hearing that and just hear people say, kids are curious, they have all these questions. That's what we want, right? Because we know if they're starting from a place of interest and curiosity, then that's where the learning happens. So I think that's been really rewarding just to hear the way that people are talking about students engaged in this work.
Sarah and Carolyn, thanks for taking time. I know it's the end of a busy day, but thank you so much for sharing the experience that you're in the middle of right now. And I know that can be a vulnerable thing to share, like, how's it going? But to hear the challenges and the successes, I think everybody can connect to that, and we need more sort of community sharing of that. Look for an email from me on Tuesday with the recording and any kind of resources that were talked about in the webinar. But thank you all for coming, and I'll see you next time.